imagine you're an engineer. The year's 1996. You're sitting in a lab in Espoo, Finland, and you're holding something the world has never seen before, a mobile phone with a touchscreen, no physical keyboard, a camera, a color display you can tap with your finger. You're 11 years ahead of the iPhone. You show it to your manager shows it to his manager. Reports are written, meetings are held, and then nothing. The device goes into a drawer. The company that built the world's first smartphone would be destroyed by the smartphone. This is not a story about technology. This is a story about what happens when an organization becomes so afraid of its own failure that it engineers it. To understand what Nokia lost, you first need to understand what the world looked like before it arrived. In 1980, a mobile phone weighed nearly 2 pounds. It was the size of a brick, cost the equivalent of $10,000 in today's money, and the calls dropped constantly. These were devices for oil executives and Wall Street traders, not for ordinary people. The idea that everyone on Earth would one day carry one seemed like science fiction. But through the late 1980s and early 1990s, something shifted. The global mobile phone market was doubling, then doubling again. Motorola dominated from Chicago, Ericsson pushed from Stockholm. The battle for what would become the most personal device in human history had begun, and almost nobody expected a small Nordic country to win it. Finland in 1990 was an economic freefall. The Soviet Union's collapse had devastated Finnish trade. Unemployment hit 19%. The government was desperate for a new industrial anchor. What they found, unexpectedly, improbably, was telecommunications. Finland had invested heavily in its national phone infrastructure. Its engineers understood wireless networks at a deep level. And right in the middle of this moment of national crisis, there was a company from a small town called Nokia that was making an extraordinary pivot. And in the middle of all this, a lumber company was about to change the world. And Nokia was founded in 1865 on the banks of the Nokia River in southwestern Finland. It was, in the most literal sense, a lumber mill. For its first 100 years, Nokia was something no one would associate with a technology company. It made rubber boots, it made cable, it made toilet paper. It was a quiet industrial conglomerate doing quiet industrial things in a quiet Scandinavian country. Then, in 1990, a man named Jorma Ollila was put in charge of Nokia's mobile phone division, a small, unprofitable side business that the board viewed as a distraction. He saw that the entire future of telecommunications was wireless, and he made a decision that looked to almost everyone around him like madness. He recommended that Nokia sell everything else, the rubber, the cables, the paper, the television sets, and go all in on mobile phones. The board said yes, barely. What followed was one of the most remarkable corporate transformations in industrial history. By 1992, Nokia engineers placed the first ever global system for mobile communications, call in the world, a standard that would become the backbone of global communication. In 1998, Nokia became the single largest manufacturer of mobile phones on the planet, overtaking Motorola. By 2000, Nokia's market capitalization had reached $250 billion. Making it the most valuable company in Europe, Nokia accounted for 4% of Finland's entire gross domestic product. Its tax contributions funded the Finnish welfare state. The Nokia logo on the side of a building in Espoo was the Finnish flag. What made Nokia great wasn't just technology, it was judgment. Nokia understood, before almost anyone else, that ordinary people wanted mobile phones too, not just executives. They designed devices that were affordable, that were durable, that fit in a pocket. The Nokia 3310, released in 2000, became a cultural icon not because it was sophisticated, but because it was indestructible and cost $200. Nokia sold 400 million of them. Jorma Ollila ran Nokia as a meritocracy with a clear mission: build the best phones for the most people. He pushed his engineers relentlessly, rewarded boldness, and created an organization that was lean, fast, and competitive. He left as chief executive officer in 2006, and that is precisely when the trouble starts. January 9th, 2007, San Francisco. Steve Jobs walks onto a stage and says he has 3 things to announce: a widescreen iPod, a revolutionary phone, and a breakthrough internet communicator. Then he pauses and says they're all the same device. The audience goes insane. Nokia's public response was calm, almost dismissive. Their executives pointed out that the iPhone had no physical keyboard, that it was expensive, that its battery life was poor. They weren't worried. But here's the thing that makes Nokia's story something more than a simple tale of disruption. Nokia had seen this coming for years. That prototype from 1996 wasn't a one off experiment. Nokia's own internal research divisions had spent years modeling what a touchscreen, app driven smartphone would look like. They had reports, they had roadmaps, they had engineers who understood in specific detail what was coming. The problem wasn't ignorance. The problem was something that a 2015 academic study by researchers Vu Ori and Hui at INSEAD would later identify as a defining feature of Nokia's culture: institutionalized fear. Nokia had become, over its years of dominance, a deeply hierarchical organization. Middle managers who delivered bad news got punished. Teams that reported problems with Symbian, Nokia's aging operating system, found their budgets cut. Executives who raised concerns about competitors were quietly sidelined, so people stopped raising concerns. They wrote optimistic reports, they softened the numbers, they told leadership what leadership wanted to hear. Nokia knew the smartphone was coming. The organization simply could not produce the honest conversation needed to respond to it. And so the response never came. This is where the story stops being about technology and starts being about human nature. By 2008, Nokia's smartphone market share reached its technical peak, 39% of the global smartphone market. On paper, those numbers look like dominance. Inside the company, something had already started to rot. Android launched in 2008, and within 18 months, it had captured more than a third of the global smartphone market. App stores were rewriting what a phone was supposed to do. Nokia had its own app store, something called OV, but it was clunky, underpowered, and perpetually behind. The engineers inside Nokia who understood what was happening tried to say so. Internal presentations warned that Symbian was 3 to 5 years behind iOS in developer experience, that the company was optimizing for hardware at exactly the moment software became the battleground. Those presentations did not reach the board. By 2009, Nokia's internal divisions were at war with each other. The smartphone team and the feature phone team competed for resources and undermined each other's roadmaps. Symbian's development was painfully slow, a software team capable of producing one flagship product per year in a market that was moving quarterly. By the end of 2010, Nokia's overall market share had fallen from 39% to 28% in a single year. The stock had lost more than half its value since 2007. 32,000 people worked for Nokia's mobile division. All of them, every single one, you could feel the ground shifting. The mood in the Espoo offices had turned dark and anxious. In Finland, Nokia was not simply a company, it was a national symbol, a proof that a small country with 5 million people could compete at the top of the global economy. As Nokia's numbers deteriorated, the anxiety extended well beyond the corporate campus. There was something in the air that felt like watching a loved one get sick. In September 2010, Nokia's board made a decision that was itself a signal of desperation. For the first time in Nokia's history, they hired a chief executive officer from outside the company. From outside Finland, Stephen Elop came from Microsoft, where he had run the Office division. He arrived to find a burning building. He just didn't know yet that he'd also be accused of pouring the gasoline. On February 8th, 2011, every Nokia employee woke up to an internal memo from their new chief executive officer. It was 1,300 words long, and it became one of the most discussed corporate documents in the history of the technology industry. Elop wrote that Nokia was standing on a burning platform. He described a man on a flaming oil rig in the North Sea, forced to choose between certain death on the platform or an uncertain leap into freezing water. Then he described Nokia. He wrote that the first iPhone had shipped in 2007 and that Nokia still didn't have a product close to its experience. He wrote that Android had arrived 2 years earlier and that week had overtaken Nokia in smartphone volumes. He called it in one word: unbelievable. The memo was not supposed to be public. It leaked within days. Elop's diagnosis was accurate. His prescription was more controversial. 2 days after the memo, he announced that Nokia would abandon Symbian entirely and build its future on Microsoft's Windows Phone operating system. The partnership was announced as a strategic alliance. Critics called it a surrender, and they pointed out the obvious. A lot had come from Microsoft, and Nokia's future now ran on Microsoft software. The Nokia Lumia series, which launched in 2011, was genuinely good hardware. Beautiful design, solid cameras, distinctive colors. By almost any technical measure, the Lumia devices were serious phones. If they had arrived in 2009, they might have mattered, but Windows Phone had less than 3% of the global smartphone market. Its app ecosystem was years behind iOS and Android. Developers weren't building for it. Consumers weren't buying it. There's a specific kind of tragedy in doing the right things, the right design, the right engineering, the right commitment, and having it not matter. Nokia's engineers were not failing. The window had simply closed. By 2012, Nokia posted a loss of 3 billion euros. Its credit rating was cut to junk. The Espoo campus began the process of contraction. Layoffs announced in waves. Entire divisions shuttered. Between 2011 and 2013, Nokia eliminated more than 40,000 jobs worldwide. On September 3rd, 2013, Microsoft announced it would acquire Nokia's Devices and Services division for approximately $7.2 billion. In Finland, the reaction was something close to national grief. Nokia had been the country's identity. Its logo had been on the side of Finnish airports. Its tax revenue had built Finnish schools. The day the sale was announced, there were people crying in the streets of Espoo. A former Nokia engineer was quoted saying that Finland was losing more than a company. It was losing a generation's confidence in itself. Stephen Elop's role in the collapse became the subject of intense debate. Some argued he was a competent leader who arrived too late to change the outcome. Others, and this view was loudest in Finland, argued that he was, in effect, a Trojan horse, a Microsoft executive who had maneuvered Nokia into Microsoft's arms while running Nokia into the ground. Whether that accusation is fair, historians still argue. What is not disputed is that during his 4-year tenure, Nokia's smartphone market share fell from 33% to 3%. In 2016, Microsoft wrote off the Nokia acquisition as a complete loss, a total charge of $7.6 billion, one of the most expensive corporate disasters in technology history. And yet, here's the unexpected ending. The story didn't quite stop there. Also in 2016, a Finnish company called HMD Global purchased the right to use the Nokia brand. They began making phones again. Nokia phones, running Android. The name was back. It had 3 lessons, not the obvious ones. The first is about the cost of organizational fear. Nokia's engineers knew they had data, prototypes, and internal research that described their competitive situation with precision. What they didn't have was an organization willing to hear it. The 2015 study by researchers Vu O-ri and Hui at INSEAD found that Nokia's middle managers routinely filtered negative information before it reached senior leadership, not out of dishonesty, but out of self-preservation. A culture had formed over years of success in which delivering bad news was dangerous. This is the real lesson of Nokia. It wasn't killed by Apple or Google. It was killed by the gap between what the organization knew and what it was willing to say out loud. Every company has information it's afraid to act on. The companies that survive are the ones that build cultures where that information can travel freely, from the engineer at the bench all the way to the board. The second lesson is about what happens when you defend instead of attack. When Nokia held 40% of the global mobile market, it began making decisions designed to protect that position rather than expand it. The reluctance to pursue a radical touchscreen strategy was partly about protecting the hardware businesses built around physical keyboards. Dominance, paradoxically, had made Nokia conservative. The companies most at risk of disruption are rarely the failing ones. They're the ones so successful, they've stopped asking what comes next. The third lesson is about ecosystems. Nokia lost the phone business before it lost the phone market. What Apple and Google built wasn't just better devices, it was a platform, an economy, developers, apps, services, payment systems, music libraries. By the time Nokia understood that the competition wasn't hardware to hardware, but ecosystem to ecosystem, Apple had 300,000 apps in its store. Nokia had none. If you find this kind of analysis valuable, and you want to see it applied to more stories like this, Consider subscribing. There's more coming. Go back to that engineer in 1996. He's holding a touchscreen smartphone, 11 years before the world was ready for one. He built it and it worked, and he knew it worked. He showed it to his manager. Reports were written. And then the system, the hierarchy, the fear, the politics, the protection of existing revenue quietly swallowed it. The device went into a drawer. The engineer went back to his desk. Nokia didn't lose because it stopped innovating. Its engineers were innovating constantly right up until the end. Nokia lost because the organization it had built during success was incapable of honoring what those engineers knew. There's no corporate cautionary tale more important than the one where the people with the answers couldn't make themselves heard. The platform was burning long before anyone was willing to say so out loud.